So I'd like to talk to you about the concept of microcultures, because the way our technology is built is it allows us to begin with a macroculture, a macro question, and then drill down to its component parts a step at a time. So let's say our macroculture was a broad question on the topic of plant protein. What you would do is quite simply start typing in the macro topic you're interested in, look at the autocomplete, select the best topic that meets the criteria you're looking for. In this case, I've selected plant protein. I run a search. In a few seconds, I get the results. Now, what I'm looking at here, when I look at this topic universe before me, this list of topics, these breadcrumbs of meaning left by the consumers in the broader context of plant protein, each one of these breadcrumbs is an opportunity for me to, consider themselves rabbit holes. It's an opportunity for you to dive into each rabbit hole to understand why that hole exists, why that relationship exists in the mind of the consumer. So one of the first things I would notice when I look at the macroculture of plant protein is I see there are a lot of topics here that relate to nutrition. For example, topics like macronutrients, micronutrients, polyunsaturated fats, dietary fats, amino acids, protein source, cholesterol, vitamins, amount of protein, nutrient intake. There's so many topics here that clearly pertain to nutrition as a whole. So clearly, in the culture of plant protein, there's a lot going on in people's minds when it comes to nutrition. So let's pick on one of these rabbit holes to basically splunk in there to understand why that exists. So I might take the example of micronutrients here. So I can click on micronutrients, and when I click on it, I get this up and down arrow key. If I click the down arrow key, what it does is it adds micronutrients as a microculture, and now I can hit apply, and it will actually rerun the analysis with micronutrients as a microculture. So let me explain what this is. Let's go to the drawing board to just explain what microcultures are. So this is what culture looks like. When you begin a search for a topic like plant protein, this is your macroculture. This is what culture looks like. Culture is never something that contains other things in its entirety. That's never the case. This is what culture actually looks like. Okay? This is what culture actually looks like. So if this is your macroculture of plant protein, right? If this is your macroculture of plant protein right here, then what we want to understand is what are the most dominant microcultures in the context of plant protein. And the most dominant microcultures are nothing but cultures that have a large surface area of interaction, right? So there's never going to be a situation where culture is entirely contained, but what we want to do is figure out what are the cultures that fall and intersect and occupy a large portion of the plant protein universe. And in this particular case, for theory sake, we're looking at 3 microcultures. So these microcultures are independent cultures in and of themselves, but they also deeply intersect and fall within, in many ways, within the purview of the macroculture of plant protein. So by starting at plant protein, we can arrive at and identify what these microcultures are within them. Now, in theory, there can be many microcultures, but as you explore the topics in your macroculture, it gives you a sense of what those microcultures could be. Now, each one of these topics are not separate microcultures in and of themselves, because many of these rabbit holes lead to the same place. They lead to the same microculture, if that makes sense. So if you were actually spending the time and exploring each one of these rabbit holes, you will find that a lot of them are pathways leading to the same spot. So I have taken one such pathway to understand what a microculture around nutrition, or this focus of nutrition, really looks like. What is going on in people's minds when they think about nutrition or topics like micronutrients in the context of plant protein. So when I run that search, I can straight away see that a lot of the discourse here is about this notion of key nutrients that people think they need, specifically key micronutrients. So there's a lot of discussion of specific micronutrients and a lot of discussion of terms like key nutrients, vital nutrients. That tells us a lot about possible concerns that people have with plant protein. More obviously, whether certain vital nutrient requirements in their body will be met when they consume plant proteins or take on a plant-based diet. So this is just a couple of minutes of analysis, but this is really the function of the microcultures feature, is it allows us to pick these rabbit holes, add them into the microculture tab and dive into them. And as we dive into them, we arrive at these microcultures that we can now explore the topics within and understand exactly what's going on in people's minds. Now, the other thing that the technology also does is when you search a microculture, it also now sizes that microculture in the context of the macroculture, right? So the microculture of micronutrients, which clearly seems to represent a whole host of micronutritional requirements, in particular this discussion around key and vital nutrients, you can see that this culture is relevant to 28 million people. It's growing by almost 32% in the short term. Now, and then you can compare this to the macroculture of plant protein, where you noticed that actually the macroculture of plant protein is not growing. It's an early consensus relevant to less people, but the moment you examine a microculture of micronutrients, now it's relevant to more people. There's growth here. And this is exactly the purpose of the microcultures feature. It allows us to, in essence, identify elements. It allows us to start at the macro level and identify microcultures that will allow us to expand the opportunities that we may have before us, that will allow us to shape a narrative that may work for our businesses, that can allow us to play in a part of the plant protein culture that actually has legs into the future, rather than get stuck in the obvious narratives, in the obvious explicit narratives that one might get if we were to interview consumers or do some basic analytics on them. Instead, now, by looking at the broader context of discourse, examining the meanings around plant protein, we can dive in or splunk into these microcultures to identify specific, you can think of them as demand spaces of opportunity. And so this is really the feature of the microculture tab, and this is really the purpose it serves. And as you use this feature, you can, very quickly splunk into a multitude of these breadcrumbs, these rabbit holes. And as you dive into multiple of them, you start to discover and understand what's going on in the consumer's mind, and start to uncover certain findings, which can eventually drive a lot of your strategic thinking and decision making. Thank you.